Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another video for Final Fantasy XIV. This time we're reading through the official PlayStation Magazine UK article that was posted, as you all no doubt probably know, 20 hours ago on the PlayStation Magazine website, and then also on Games Radar, which is where we're looking at it today. So basically this interview was with OPM, with Naoki Yoshida of the Final Fantasy XIV, so the producer and director there. And basically, it goes through a few things, including PlayStation 5 and some of the other bits, but let's just get straight to it. Of course, I take no credit for this particular article. I certainly didn't write it. I didn't write anything here. I didn't ask any of the questions. This belongs to the original owners, and you can find a link in the top of that description for you to go and give it some love. I highly recommend it because there's some top-notch questions asked here. So all credit to Oscar Taylor Kent of the OPM staff. Much love. So anyway, let's sit down and read through this, because I know a lot of people are on the go and not everybody can go and read this sort of stuff. You might be in your car, so let's carry on. So first of all, OPM asks, last time an expansion was announced, I was watching from a huge crowd in Las Vegas. For obvious reasons, this wasn't possible this time around. How did you find the change in pace with the Endwalker announcement? Yoshi P says, so actually, to be honest, you may be aware actually, but we actually hired out a cinema for this announcement. And at the time, we really did want the fans to be there. We wanted the fans to actually come and participate in the announcements, but as you might already know, the state of emergency was announced in Tokyo, and that unfortunately put a spanner in the works. That really wasn't good for our plans, so we knew that there was this risk involved, and it was kind of unfortunate that this did have an impact on the way that we were able to make the announcement. You know, all of the fans were sending their responses and being so vocal in their support. That was really huge for us. We could really feel the response from the fans. I think the fans were really there to help us in this situation. When we look at how we would do it usually, at a keynote in a fan fest with all of the reaction we get from the players, in a way it was actually the same thing that we experienced on our digital channels. On the 3 streaming channels that we had, all the responses that we really got from our players really seemed the same. I personally feel it was a very positive response. Having said that, though, it is true I went a bit over the time and we did go over the schedule, but I think it was a great response, yeah. In a way, actually having this reaction over the digital channels was helpful in some aspects. For example, if you're actually there in the event and you just hear people clapping and you know they're shouting and expressing that emotion, that's good. But I don't really get a clear view into what specifically they're really thinking, like what points they want to know more about, or what points they are really happy about. So actually, by having them communicate with me directly, I can actually see what they're writing and really what points they're particularly vocal about. That's an interesting point. I suppose it is completely difficult if you think about it. You know, you've got this huge packed, almost stadium of people, especially when it comes to the Japanese fan fest, full of people all eagerly anticipating, all screaming at the top of their lungs, all doing lots of different things. It can be quite hectic. So yeah, I suppose the only real normal feedback that they get and questions about things they're interested in, the audience is interested in, is probably at press briefings. I've been to one of those before. It's quite interesting, but yeah, I would imagine that this is a completely different kettle of fish, not having anybody there at all. So let's continue. OPM say Endwalker is bringing the story arc started in A Realm Reborn to a close. Why was now the time to do it? Great question. Great question. Yoshida says, to put a conclusion on this ongoing saga in Final Fantasy XIV, the Heidelin Zodiac saga was actually something that we decided actually quite a while ago. To put it simply, if we take an example of a TV drama, if we're just dragging out a story and people don't want to watch it, then of course that's not going to do us any good. Maybe, for example, we get up to the 4th season, but then, okay, we decide to continue the fun until the 6th season or the 8th season maybe. And people would be really sick of it, They really wouldn't be able to stand it anymore. So there was kind of a sense that we shouldn't really drag this out on for no reason at all, because it really wouldn't be too much for the viewers to take. Sorry, some of this English is a little bit obviously disjointed. I'll continue. But of course, on the other end of the spectrum, we actually need Final Fantasy XIV to be a success to continue. So, if Final Fantasy XIV isn't a successful title, then actually the company will tell us that we have to stop working on this game. So it is important to ensure the future of the title. So it's very similar, again, to a TV drama. In the first season of a TV drama, if it's not successful, then you won't have the second season or the third season. So, in the same way, actually, we need to make sure that Final Fantasy XIV had a stable basis for success. In terms of the timing, for us, it was around Stormblood when we actually felt, now we have a sense that, Final Fantasy XIV's success is going to prosper in the long run. It was really around that time that actually we were thinking that we should cleanly finish off the Hydaelyn and Zodiac saga, maybe in 6.0 or 7.0. But it was around that time that we were thinking about this. It was actually for this reason, you might know as well, but in the Final Fantasy FanFest 2018, I actually asked the players where they wanted to go, and some players said, the moon, and I said half-jokingly, maybe in 7.0, but this is actually the reason for that. We did actually have that already in mind back then. But if you actually ask then why 6.0 instead of 7.0, that was actually due to the impact of Shadowbringers. So, of course, all of the fans really enjoyed Shadowbringers, or 5.0, so much. Seeing their response, we wanted to keep the momentum going, so I actually decided that it would be better that we actually round off the Hydaelyn and Zodiac story in 6.0. Because we can keep that momentum, and we can have the players even more excited. But still, in terms of the volume, there was enough volume to actually incorporate that into 6.0, so that was really the direction we went in. Interesting. So, yeah, I still think a lot of people who actually shouted the moon probably impacted that direction more than they think, actually, and it's quite surprising. But it had been rumoured for ages, hadn't it, if we remember. So here's a big one. OPM says, are you hoping that with the Hydaelyn and Zodiac arc concluding, it'll provide an opportunity for new players to jump in? Yoshi P says, actually, that's something that's been asked by quite a lot of media outlets. But I don't personally think that with ending the Hydaelyn and Zodiac story, our goal in mind is getting new players in. That's actually not an aim here. So again, you can actually think of it as a TV drama. Of course, as the TV drama gets more seasons in there, you're still going to have the same cast. So I think that people, if anything, I want people to see it from the start. Basically, they can actually have a look at this, maybe 6.0, and they can think about it. Oh wow, Final Fantasy XIV is such an amazing game, I really want to experience this, and it would be great to experience that from the start. Of course, it really wouldn't make much sense if they were just entering halfway through, and you've got all of those characters who, of course, they don't really know. So if anything, it would be great that they can actually see the appeal of Final Fantasy XIV. And I think that it's appealing to new players in the respect that, they would think, oh yeah, I really want to get stuck in and get started from the beginning to really experience the whole great story that we have to offer. So yeah, if anything, it would be great that new players join and start playing from the start to really experience the great story. There is actually an interesting example of this. There's actually a trend for people to be pulling away from the television. So they're actually becoming more interested in personal things, which they find appealing. And they're actually getting more engaged into those activities. You can take an example of in Japan, there's a really popular franchise now called Demon Slayer. You might be aware. It was a huge hit in Japan, and now it is also spreading across the globe. So actually, the interesting thing about that was that it was a manga, and an anime as well was adapted from that. But it was actually interesting that it only became a hit after the manga had been completed. So then people got into it after the completion of the story, and then they could actually see the appeal of it. I think a similar thing for Final Fantasy XIV. So, the 6.0 story, people aren't really going to be interested about joining just to experience that. But because it will be so interesting, we really hope that people actually join in and actually experience the story right from the start. So even in the case of Demon Slayer, I personally actually heard about it when it was becoming a very big trend and people were saying, oh yeah, you've got to watch it. But I actually started watching the anime and then I could see, oh yeah, this is awesome, this is great. So I think it's just perfect. It parallels the situation that we have here in Final Fantasy XIV. Really, it would be great that people get stuck into the game, then actually really experience it from the start, end quote. So an interesting point there, and if I have to say actually another time, I'm going to burst into laughter. I'm so sorry about that. Obviously, disjointed English, it's translated. You know, fair dues to Yoshi P on that one. But I actually agree with a lot of that. The only problem I've got with that then is that they're most likely going to add another level skip up to level 80, right? So for people to jump straight into that story to experience it. So it's kind of like saying that he wants people to fully experience this beautiful winding storyline, but at the same time, you know, the option's there to skip it. I don't know. Obviously there's a business decision behind that rather than a actual, you know, storyline decision that they want you to play through. So it's interesting to hear him talk about something like that. I've not heard him say something like that before. Usually it's been a little bit more split down the middle, but there we go. Next up, we have the PlayStation 5 Beta is coming very soon, perhaps sooner than expected. Was it important to have that version ready as soon as possible? Yoshi says, I'm just providing you an honest answer as a producer's point of view. When the new hardware is out, there's not many launch titles available. In the market, when new hardware is there, there's not really much to play, right? It's also the case for the industry in general. Other companies are seeing what could be the benchmark, what could be the quality that players will want, and what will be the loading speed. How will that be optimized with the new hardware? When the new hardware is launched, it will also attract new people in to play the games that are available. For example, we'll be releasing the PlayStation 5 version as an open beta, and the PS4 and PS5 version free trial is available now, where players can play up to level 60, and there are so many things on offer in the game. So because there are not many games available, because there are not many games available for the new hardware, why don't you just try out the PS5 version of 14, get the hang of it, just to see what this game offers in the free trial? Then you can just wait until the AAA blockbuster titles come up in the market, and then you can try those new ones. So, you know, we just wanted to keep the momentum from the start. Actually, the start is a good chance for us to attract new people to get them on the trial for 14 before everyone comes in with the PS5 edition of their games. Yeah, I mean, that's basic, isn't it? They just want you to experience it on the new console, and there's not really much out, so you might as well play 14, and I'm personally looking forward to this open beta. I'm curious if this will be on private servers or if this will be live. I think it will be live. If you've played the PlayStation 5, I'd say it's the Final Fantasy XIV PS4 version on PS5, but there are already some enhancements, especially with loading times and such. So it'll be interesting to see what else they do. I'm looking forward to that personally. Next up then, as an MMO developer, what's excited you the most about working with the PS5 hardware? Yoshi says, so really as an MMO developer, the two big things that really appeal from this hardware is first of all the memory size. There's a huge increase in the memory size, so that's very helpful for us in developing the title. And also there's much faster loading speeds. Those two things really, I think they're also things that the players can really imagine would make an impact on their gameplay experience. OPM says, you're in a unique position with 14, having even been on PS3. How does spanning hardware generations affect how you approach iteration? Great question. Yoshi P says, so first it really goes back to the design stage. As you know, with the original Final Fantasy XIV, unfortunately it was a failure, and we actually had to overhaul that, really rework it from the ground up for A Realm Reborn. But when we were actually doing the design work for A Realm Reborn, we were working on the engine, and one of the goals was that it would actually run on low-spec PCs across the world. But at the same time, we also had a goal in mind that we wanted to ensure that there was really no loss in the graphical quality, which people expect from a Final Fantasy title. Really, it was making sure that both of those things go hand in hand and actually work together. So those were actually the 2 points that we were really working on when we were approaching the design work for the engine. But with the Final Fantasy XIV engine, we actually designed it so that it would be scalable. So based on the hardware that's used, you might be able to increase the number of characters on screen or decrease the characters, or actually increase the rendering area or decrease the rendering area. In that respect, we had a scalable engine in place that we had prepared, but unfortunately we were actually at a bit of a disadvantage with the PS3 architecture, because the PS3 architecture was quite unique. Unfortunately, that forced us to undergo various tuning costs. That was a bit of extra work on our side to accommodate, but things actually improved with the PS4. As you know, Sony actually incorporated architecture which is based around the PC configuration, so actually that makes our job much easier. Using our scalable engine, we can optimize the title on the PS4, which was a much easier process compared to PS3. Now that we have this kind of framework in place, when we have new hardware introduced, it's actually relatively easy for us to actually expand the title and actually deliver the title on that hardware. So there we go. There's the reasons for that. Yeah, I mean, what can I say apart from that? The engine obviously has its dated moments, but I think it definitely stands up to modern day standards for me personally. As someone who plays the game, but don't know. Maybe there's always people asking for graphical upgrades, but we'll have to wait and see at what point they decide to do that. I think it is probably inevitable that they do up it at some point, but I just don't know if that's a feasible thing anytime soon. Next up, we have more continued. Sorry. Oh no, here's a question. No other MMO feels as dedicated to console parity as Final Fantasy XIV. Why has it been so important to keep at that approach? Yoshi says, very simply put, that is because this is Final Fantasy. As you know, spanning over 30 years, maybe 35 years, this franchise has been on consoles. Really, the home of Final Fantasy is on console. Because of that, it's really our duty to ensure that people who are playing on a console really have an experience which is by no means inferior to those playing on PC. So really, we need to make sure that people really do get the best experience on console as well. But actually, you might already know, but personally, I'm quite a big MMO fanboy. I really do like my MMOs. Traditionally, there's been this view that MMOs are a very niche genre, and as you know, really hardcore gamers are playing MMOs. I actually wanted to change that outlook. I really wanted to change that perception of MMOs. I wanted to make MMOs more accessible to general gamers. So in a way, I wanted to make the genre itself more popular. And as a means to that end, obviously providing the title on the consoles was part of that. People would usually think, oh, if I want to play an MMO, I have to play it on a PC. I wanted to change that kind of outlook about it. So actually delivering this on console as well, it played a part in changing the perception of MMOs, but that was actually more a personal kind of goal of mine. I certainly think he's achieved that, because there's plenty of games that are mimicking 14 now, even the big players, right? It's no kind of like surprise, and inspiration is something that does spread, and I think the success of 14 has, spread to other games as a result of that, especially the features that we have in our game. Yeah, definitely. Next up, OPM says, as game development gets bigger and more complicated, the gaps between numbered Final Fantasy games get wider, but 14 always remains ongoing with updates. Does that create more pressure and responsibility, considering it's a very visible part of the series? Ooh, good one. Yoshi says, with respect to the Final Fantasy franchise, I don't actually feel any responsibility. Really, when I think about it from the player's perspective, there is kind of like a pressure for us to deliver a new experience with the new patches and with the new expansion. So in that respect, yeah, there is a responsibility that we have to really deliver the best experience for the players. But with respect to the Final Fantasy franchise in general, I don't truly feel responsible for that, because Final Fantasy XIV is just a title in itself. So I don't really feel responsible for the franchise. But of course, it is important that we deliver the best experience for people who are playing 14. Of course, I am the producer of Final Fantasy XVI, so with respect to that title, of course, I really do want to be able to deliver that title quickly to the Final Fantasy fans, so that they do have a new title to play, rather. But even when we release 16, that's not going to be the end of 14. We're still going to be developing, working on 14, and trying to deliver new experiences for our player base on 14. We really do want those great experiences to continue on this title. We really will be putting in all of our best efforts to make sure that 14 continues, and people will be able to have a great time playing the title. But as you actually touched upon, because we're constantly updating 14, even after 16 is released, we'll be releasing more content updates on 14. In that respect, 14 is, in a sense, the latest Final Fantasy, so we will continue to work on delivering those content updates because 14 does have that standing in the franchise. We will be continuing our best efforts on this title. Until, the number will seem old. Then, we could change the number maybe? How about Final Fantasy 20? That could have a good ring to it. For a while at least, that will keep us ahead of the game. Ooh, Yoshi P dropping the idea of Final Fantasy 20 being an MMO. Hello there. So when 14 finally gets a little bit crusty, in the many years to come, and Final Fantasy 20 comes out, I guess I'm going to be a Final Fantasy 20 content creator and influencer, guys. That's going to be interesting, isn't it? Right, then next up we've got, you're also involved in Final Fantasy 16, and it seems like a lot of Final Fantasy fans were pleased to hear your involvement. You and the team have built a lot of trust with players, and you even said at the reveal event that you're committed to Final Fantasy XIV as your life's work. Do you think that open communication with the fans is part of the Final Fantasy XIV success story? Yoshi P says, yeah. And so actually, in a sense, having people that need you, that, actually is important, I feel. It might be the company, they say, oh man, without you, we cannot make this game. We really need you to be there for us. And in the same way, that actually applies to the fans as well. If there are fans there and they say, we really want you to be working on this title, that is really assuring and really comforting in a way that serves as motivation for me to aim for higher places, to really aim for better things, provide better experiences. So in that sense, yes, having someone there that actually wants your support and wants you to be working on this, that actually helps me get my motivation and to deliver something really special and to continue working on this franchise. In that sense, that is important. Yeah. But really, in the case of an MMO, it doesn't have to be an MMO. For any title that you're actually having on as a live service over a long time span, it's not really a peachy experience to support that title for such a long time. You need engineers working on it, and you need to be constantly providing new updates for it. So in that sense, it's a tough experience to be constantly working on it. But since the fans are there, and I've been able to cultivate this relationship with the fans, and we do have a sense of trust with our fans over these 10 years, that really does play a big part. That really is motivating for us to continue working on this title. Of course, it would be a different story if they don't want to continue on this road together, but as long as the fans really continue to express their support, that's really assuring, and we can leverage our trust with the fans and continue providing an amazing experience by working on this title. And there we go, that's the end of that. So as you can full well see here, Yoshi P is expressing his passion for working on 14, and honestly, the more times I see interviews with Yoshi P, and the more I hear about insider stories and stuff, the more you realize that he really is just like one of the people that are playing the game, like you out there, like myself. You're passionate about seeing something to fruition. You want to see something finish, but you also want to keep it going, you know what I mean? I think he's a very ambitious individual and an incredibly talented individual at that as well, especially when it comes to bringing a team together. So props there. I'm looking forward to Final Fantasy 16. That's going to be interesting, especially the focus on the direct words there. Paraphrasing a little bit was like, to bring Final Fantasy 16 as soon as possible, right? As fast as possible. That's definitely a direct reference to Hajime Tabata and Final Fantasy 15. and the obviously the release of that being staggered into multiple DLC episodes to finish the story. It lost a lot of money. It cost a lot of people their jobs. Yeah, ultimately, they don't want to make that sort of mistake again. So if anyone can do it, I'm pretty sure Yoshi P is probably the person to do that. Anyway, there we go. Hopefully this interview was interesting. It certainly was interesting for me. It's always nice to see the perspective of a developer posed interesting questions. Hopefully in the future we see more questions directed towards features in Endwalker. That would be some nice bits of information to hear about, especially relating to all of the stuff they announced at the showcase. Maybe pick apart some of that information, but until we see interviews like that, hopefully we see more interviews like this. The more the better, really. And thank you so much, obviously, to OPM, the official PlayStation magazine, Games Radar, and Oscar Taylor Kent for this wonderful article and questions. So anyway, link in the description. Go give this some love if you liked it. I certainly did myself. Link in the description right at the top. And let me know what you think about this. Hopefully this was helpful for people who have the inability to read this themselves at this time. Much love, enjoy the rest of your day, more videos coming up, and I'll see you all next time.